Yoram, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going back in time. It was almost 2 years ago. It was before COVID because we were in the studio. You've joined us on a few programs, but one that I remember specifically was addressing trust, because trust is such an important factor in relationships. And Yoram, this is what you specialize in. You're a real expert in this, I believe, one of the world's top gurus on trust. You have the Trust Show podcast. You've written a book, which is excellent, The Book of Trust. And we're also very honored to have you on the McCuistion TV Advisory Council. So I trust your judgment as well. But in that program that you joined us for, Yoram, you talked about the various elements of trust. And I'd like to refer back to that, and also a recent article that you wrote, Trust and First Impression, because it seems to me that trust today is eroded from where it might have been a couple of years ago. Do you mind addressing that?
Sure. And first of all, Nikki, thank you for having me again. And I don't like to refer to myself as a guru or an expert, but rather as a researcher, because I always find new things as I continue my practice, as I talk to more people. I always find new things. And this is why the Book of Trust is now in the 3rd edition, and I keep going from there. Yes. So trust is eroding. That's the first thing. And it's eroding for several different reasons, and I kind of track that to the 6 components. And one of them, for example, is competence. We trust people who are competent. In fact, in one of my studies, I found a correlation, a 58.4%, almost 60% correlation between how competent we think the other person is and how much we trust them. And part of that is eroding because of, frankly, because of COVID, because education went to study from home. Almost every education agency tells you that our students are now starting to lag in their knowledge, in their education, and frankly, it leads directly to their competence. The Great Resignation that we're going through, I think a lot of employees are finding that their employers are not as loyal to them as they thought they are. And so that creates a trust component breakdown, if you will.
Yoram, can we go back to competent?
Yes.
We tend to trust someone who is competent rather than someone who is not.
Right.
However, it appears to me, and from everything I've seen in our research, is that our trust in officials, in politicians, in people who are very competent, supposedly, at what they do, that trust is eroding.
And I think that this erodes because of another component. So competence is important, and it's one of the 6 components in my model. The other is personality compatibility. And by personality compatibility, it doesn't mean that we have to be the same. We can be completely opposite, but complementary. And that's still, in my opinion, considered personality compatibility. So we're compatible. And I think that one of the things that I've seen in politics is what I would call a unidimensional topic, or they're addressing topics in a unidimensional way. So if you take, for example, voting. Voting is one of the key issues, especially since the last elections. And you see one side saying, we need to let people who want to vote access to voting. So it's really important that we give them access to voting. Then the other side says, we need to maintain voting integrity. And the thing is that they fight over the means instead of the dimensions of value. So instead of fighting over how do we make sure that we increase both? I mean, why don't we start, our starting point must be, we need to give access to voting to everybody who wants to vote. Anyone who wants to vote should have access to voting.
Makes sense.
At the same time, we need to maintain voting integrity and make sure that nothing skews intentionally or unintentionally voting results. But the thing is that we stopped looking, our politicians stopped looking at those as two dimensions, and they're looking at the issue as a unidimensional one, and they focus on, do we require voter ID or do we not require voter ID? That should not be the question. So I think that our politics are going more in a direction of unidimensional issues where one side, the other side, you have to be here or there, instead of trying to really get to a win-win. MIT did a study back in 2015. They counted the results of roll call votes in the US Congress, dating back to, I think, the 30s or the 40s. Maybe it was 1946. And they started looking at agreements across party lines. And I remember that number clearly because in 1970, I think it was 1977, right after the Vietnam War. Think about the political polarization we should have had. That level of correlation, that level of agreement across party lines, in all the roll call votes they had almost 13,000 agreements across party lines. 30 years later, 2007, the number of roll call votes went up 75%. The correlation, the agreement across party lines went from 13,000 to 181.
It seems that we're on a slippery slope, and polarization leads to perhaps a lack of trust. Well, Yoram, on the program that's going to be airing in a week or two, the issue, the question, the program was, how do we regain trust? How can we go about regaining trust when it seems something is broken?
I think it starts with self-reflection. One of the most important things that I found about trust is that trust is relative. And I know that it's different than anything else that you heard. You heard that there is a complete set, a universal and absolute set of things that you must do in order to be trusted, and you're going to be trusted by all people. But let me break this. Break this myth. First of all, it could be the exact same things that you would do that would cause one person to trust you and another person to distrust you. So I think, and I'll give you one example. One example is, take procrastination. Sounds very, very simple. Procrastination. Is procrastination good or bad? We typically look at procrastination as a bad thing, right? I mean, it's you waiting for the last minute. And I know it drives me crazy when my students wait for the last 9 minutes after I give them 6 days deadline to submit an assignment. In the last 9 minutes, they submit it. But you know what? There are good things about procrastination. For example, you get to let ideas incubate in your head. You get to talk to other people. Things change. You have new information. Procrastination is good. There are two sides. Neither one of them is actually good or bad. Procrastination can be good. It can be bad. It's especially bad if you stress. Why is that important? It's important because if you ask a procrastinator that has to work in a team with somebody who must finish the job as soon as they get it, the procrastinator will trust the other person. The other person will not trust the procrastinator because the procrastinator causes stress, because they wait for the last minute, because they need to be in control of everything. So that is relative. It's relative and it's personal. So the first step in how we regain trust is we have to look in the mirror, but we have to look in the mirror and not see ourselves through our own eyes, but rather see ourselves through another person's eyes, through the other person's eyes. And I think that's one thing that's eroding our empathy, our ability to see things, even see ourselves through another person's eyes. And if we don't gain that, we don't regain trust. That, to me, is the first step. Your ability, your willingness, your intent to see yourself through other people's eyes, that's how you start regaining trust.
That requires quite a level of awareness about oneself, doesn't it?
It is.
Yoram, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing that program again, because I think no matter how often we take a look at programs around issues that are personal as well as professional, and trust is the bottom line for both, isn't it? It's about
It is.
relationships.
Trust is the foundation for everything. I found that the most important question, the answer to this question, will have the biggest impact on anybody's personal or professional success or failure. Can you be trusted? And Nikki, thank you for having me today. Thank you for rerunning that show. And thank you for giving trust such a prominent place.
It deserves it. And thank you, Yoram, for being such a specialist researcher, since you don't like the word guru. All right. Thank you. I appreciate you. Take good care.
Thank you, Nikki. You too.